So this video is a little different than the content I normally do, but what's wrong with a little detour now and then, I suppose? So let's get into it. Christian YouTube apologist, IP, or Inspiring Philosophy, a few months back released a video talking about the top 10 biblical problems for young earth creationism. Now, IP is way smarter than me, and he puts in a ton of work into his videos. Nonetheless, in this video concerning the Hebrew portion of things, specifically, I would like to, as a Christian brother, suggest some possible weaknesses with the arguments. First, let's look at IP's argument for proof number 3 in his top 10 proofs.
As noted before, young earth believers say before the fall, the earth was blissful and perfect, with no death or suffering. But Genesis 1:28 suggests the opposite was true. Humanity is told to subdue the earth and have dominion over all animals. In Hebrew, these words are extremely harsh. The first word is used of war conquest and enslavement. The second word refers to ruling harshly over someone, or oppression.
Okay, the second word does not always mean ruling harshly. That's just not true.
So God is telling humans to make a warlike conquest on the earth because it needs subdued, implying the earth wasn't perfect and humanity was elected to transform the earth into a better place.
Okay, so there's a lot of extrapolations in this. A lot of outside the text type of stuff going on.
But to do that meant tackling the harsh environments forcefully. The scholar Joshua John Van Eat notes the use of the second word for ruling over the animals seems to suggest humans had the right to use animals for any purpose, like food and clothing.
Nothing like the convincing argument of seems to suggest.
Implying they already had the right to kill and eat animals. But this means the command from God implies the earth was not a perfect, blissful creation. Instead, this verse implies the earth was chaotic and needed order brought to it.
So which verse implies that it was chaotic? I think that's you implying that into the text.
Also, humans seem to be given the right to kill animals, implying death was already in existence.
There's a lot of implying going on. IP is correct when he shows the occurrences of the Hebrew word kavash and how it is used in the text. In about every context, it means to conquer, to subjugate, even possibly to violate a woman, like in the book of Esther. And it can mean to humiliate. The other word, radah, has a less homogeneous usage. The word in general means to rule. Context decides whether it is just or unjust ruling. God explicitly makes clear in the usage of this word in different texts that your ruling can be done positively, and he prohibits ruthless ruling over others. So Kavash is more aggressive in its usage, whereas Radah has both the unjust ability, but also the just ability. Context, though, is king. Context decides how words are to be defined. IP seems to conclude, mostly relying on the word kavash and his source material, death in the garden, that the verses show that the humans had to subdue a chaotic creation. The added extrapolations of hunting and killing animals and all that jazz is way beyond any information actually given in the passage, and also doesn't make sense in light of Genesis chapter 9 verses 1 through 3. It reads, "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. If they had always been allowed to eat animals, then why does God say this to Noah and his sons after the creation account? Shouldn't they already know they can eat animals? IP suggests the belief that humans were created to subdue the already ongoing primeval chaos and bring it into order. The flaw in this is obvious if you are familiar with language studies. This is simply not how decisions are made as to what words mean. This is a common mistake you usually see in Christians who dabble in learning a Greek or Hebrew word here or there. They think you can just look up the word you find interesting in the dictionary, see the list of possible definitions, pick the one they want, and bam, the verse says what I want. This is not proper syntax. The context defines the word, not the word by itself. Words are defined by the words around them. This is what creates specificity in meaning. Autoantonyms are a good example of this. In English, the word overlook can have meanings that are the complete opposite depending on the context. I could say I overlooked the secret code in the letter. Or we could use overlook in this way. From the tower, I overlooked the sea. Now, in one context, overlook means to not see something, and in the other, it means to see a vast amount. They mean total opposites depending upon the context. I can't just look up the word overlook in the dictionary and just plug it into the sentence to mean whatever I wish it to be. The meaning has to fit the context. Therefore, while IP shows us occurrences and definitions of Kavash, that doesn't follow that the definition that best fits the context is what he says. IP would need to show why that's the best fit for the context against the proposed young earth explanation for the context. In the world of understanding the meaning of the text, context is king. So let's look at the creation account. Is the earth and its creatures an enemy army to be defeated? Doesn't appear so. Does the creation need to be brought into service or work? Possibly. Is creation to be violated? No. So the only distantly possible but somewhat similar context in understanding how Kavash is meant to be used here in this usage of subduing slaves for work and subduing the garden for work. Now, humans were probably to subdue plants and the animals for work. However, to take that to mean that this proves there is a wild and chaotic creation in need of being brought into submission and that that's what they would be doing is going quite beyond the available evidence for this. The context does not show this very clearly at all. Definitely not to the extent to be a proof to debunk young earth creationism. Only in a warlike context would this match the other times Kavash is used for that. Therefore, this is lacking in being a proof against young earth creationism. The next biblical proof IP brings up is the Hebrew word bara.
Number 2 is not so much a passage, but the use of a Hebrew word. Many young earth creationists believe this word refers to God creating out of nothing, and it is used frequently throughout Genesis 1.
I've never heard anybody believe that word meant created out of nothing.
But looking at how the word is used outside of Genesis 1 implies bara doesn't necessarily mean creation out of nothing. It might not even refer to material creation at all. John Walton has done a full semantic analysis on the word.
Oh, Johnny boy.
And he points out the word never necessarily means creation out of nothing.
It never necessarily means creation out of nothing. Okay?
And there are several times it cannot mean that.
There are several times it cannot mean that. Seems like overwhelming evidence to me. Eat it, young earthers.
In Psalm 51, the author uses bara to ask God to make a new clean heart within him. This obviously doesn't refer to the creation of a new material heart out of nothing. In Isaiah 65, it refers to electing Jerusalem to be a place of joy. In Isaiah 43, it refers to creating the nation of Israel, which came about over time and through natural processes.
Israel was created through natural processes? Not sure about that. Like the whole 10 plagues thing? Created through natural processes, like the 10 plagues of Egypt.
In Ezekiel 21, it refers to making a sign. It is even used to refer to David not eating food. There are times it could refer to material creation out of nothing, but it never necessarily does.
There are a few times it means it, but never necessarily. This is a weird phrase for a proof.
And there are clear examples where bara cannot refer to material creation. So there is no reason to assume that that is the meaning in Genesis 1, especially given the previous problems that we have gone over. Kenneth Matthews notes bara more likely refers to bringing about activity rather than material manufacturing, implying Genesis 1 is not about material creation.
IP is hard to pin down here, as the claims sound suggestive and never very certain. Only until the conclusion does he sound more certain about the claim, which makes this hard to address. IP first claims this is a proof to show that young earth creationists are wrong to think that the meaning to this word bara means creation out of nothing. Ex nihilo. Now, I don't know of any young earth creationists who think that. But on the other hand, I haven't really heard many young earth creationists give thorough arguments on the Hebrew text of Genesis, as much as I have heard them talk about scientific claims. Like I pointed out earlier, words rarely have just one meaning, and every context is different in how a word will be used. So it would suffice that the claim bara always means creation ex nihilo has a high probability of being wrong. So IP is right in saying that claim is false. This again is assuming young earth creationists actually claim this, of course. However, IP goes on to briefly present good old John Walton and his claims that bara usage refers to non-material creation. Yes, I have read his book and have thought about doing an episode or two talking about his claims in the book and displaying some counter evidence to his claims. Let me know in the comments if people would be game for that. If not, then I will put it on the back burner for some future day. But the claim that bara means non-material creation is unconvincing and not a very solid argument, as the evidence isn't that clear to make those kinds of statements. So here is the word bara that he was talking about. Here's the word bara, and here it is down here. It's all in red. This is the word that means create. And they were making the claim in the video that bara doesn't necessarily or never necessarily means that it has to do with the physical creation. Well, this is a bit of circular argumentation here, because if you start out with the premise that Genesis 1:1, where it uses bara, isn't a real creation, it's like something else, I don't know. Some sort of, metaphorical creation. Then the problem is this word appears many times, but it appears mostly in the context of creating the heavens and the earth, like creation and that kind of thing, like mountains and the wind and weather and those type of things. So if you start off with the premise that, hey, this doesn't mean material stuff, well then every other time it talks about the creation and creating the heavens and the earth and anything to do with creation, you're going to then assume, well, that's not true either. And so we're kind of already stuck believing the beginning premise. So The problem is that that doesn't really prove your point. You're just automatically stating what you think it to mean. So bara here means creating and creating the heavens. And so Isaiah 45:18 is saying, "For thus says Yahweh, who created the heavens, he is God. Who formed the earth and made it, he established it. He did not create it empty, he formed it to be inhabited. I am Yahweh, there is no other." Okay, this is clearly saying that God is the one who created everything. But again, if you think this is all metaphorical or some other type of interpretation as to the creation, then you're already assuming the definition to the word, and there's nothing we can do. I can show you other times he's talking about physical things, but that doesn't matter because you're already thinking that. You're already thinking that it's not that. Here again, he's talking about Eden, the Garden of Eden, and talking about all the stones and stuff were there. And he's reminding them, on that day you were created. Well, is he talking about, really, is he the creator, or is this like a metaphor or something? For behold, he who forms the mountains and creates baraz, the wind, ruach. So, did God really create the wind, or is this metaphorical? It does have to do with physical objects, though. So to assume that this is always metaphorical seems to be going pretty far. I mean, it's not as if there's clear evidence that it is physical or not. You're just kind of going with whatever basis you start with. So to call this even a proof is pretty crazy, because there's not really a lot of evidence to support this belief. In the context, if we were just to read this plainly, it says what it says. It says he creates the wind. Now you can say, no, he doesn't. But that's what the text says. You just got to deal with that. Once again, regardless, it doesn't matter if every single instance of the word is used in a certain way elsewhere, if in this one passage it doesn't make sense with the context. Context is king. We don't say, well, it's symbolic everywhere else, so since the same word is used here, we are going to change the context to fit the word. You need some black and white obvious evidence in the context that it does not mean physical creation and means a symbolic creation. Interestingly, though, as a side note, with the verb bara, every time it's used, God is the subject of the verb. Now, the number one proof IP asserts is the beginning verse to the Bible, Genesis 1:1.
This may come as a shock to you, but the very first verse of the Bible can create difficulties for young Earth models. The reason is, over the past few decades, scholars have noted the first verse lacks a definite article in Hebrew.
They've noticed it's missing the definite article? What?
So the way we translate it may not be accurate. Instead, scholars like John Salhammer and Robert Homestead have argued it would make more sense to translate it as when God began to create the heavens and the earth. What this would mean is verse 1 is no longer a complete sentence, but what we would call a dependent clause in an incomplete sentence. So this would mean verse 1 is dependent on the following clause, which is in verse 2. So Genesis is really saying, when God began to bara the heavens and the earth was formless and void. In other words, when God started baraing the heavens and the earth, it was already there as formless and void. So many scholars note this implies Genesis 1 is not about bringing the universe and the earth into existence for the first time, but is about God transforming the earth from a chaotic state into an ordered state. If the Hebraic form of verse 1 and 2 implies the earth was already there existing before the creation week, then the text supports an extended period of time prior to this and is not actually stating the absolute beginning point of our universe.
Yeah, that would be convenient.
Now I know some of these points might come as a shock to you.
All right, so first off, this isn't like a new discovery scholars have never noticed before about the first verse. Everyone who knows first year Hebrew can plainly see that the definite article isn't there. However, that doesn't mean much in biblical Hebrew or Koine Greek for that matter. You have to take into account the standard grammatical rules before you just start switching the definite article, which is the word the, with some other word like when. Listen, there are rules, Smokey. This ain't not. Once again, context matters, but also the rules of grammar matter. You can't just go swapping words out with new words you want just to help you achieve your goal. Let me show you as best I can what's going on here in the text and what the grammatical possibilities actually are. I'm going to try not to use too many terms while I explain this, so hopefully everyone can follow my points here. Now, as you can see, the translators for the ESV thought it should read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But the objection raised by IP is that it should say when God began to create or something like that. And that there should be a when at the beginning of the clause here. So if we look though, well, let's look at the Hebrew, see what's going on. So you have this word right here. This is a bait, and this is a vowel underneath. And so you have these two dots. Well, normally there would be a different vowel underneath, and that would mean the, if we were talking about the. So if I go over here, you see this little line. That line would be under this letter instead of these two dots, and that would mean that we would say in the. But it's not there. We just got the two dots. So it's just in. And then this is the word beginning. So it would read in beginning. And then Bara is right here. And this is the word created. So in beginning created. And then this is Elohim, God. So IP is right in pointing out that there is no the. However, this is not that remarkable. This is actually pretty common that Hebrew will not have a the where English would put a the, and vice versa. So sometimes Hebrew will put the, which is this word right here. It'll put the definite article all over the place. It'll put it everywhere. Just like their word for and, which is this letter right here. They'll be all over the place. Where English, hates ands. They don't like putting ands everywhere. But Hebrew doesn't mind it at all and loves putting ands everywhere. So you have to translate based on the language you're translating to. So in English, we would say in the beginning. Okay, regardless if there's a the there, we just wouldn't say in beginning God created, or in a beginning God created. We wouldn't say that. It's clear that in English this would translate to in the beginning God created. The same thing happens in Koine Greek. A famous one is Jehovah's Witnesses will say, well, in John chapter 1 in the Greek it says was a God, because there's no definite article. Well, if you know the rules of Greek grammar, you know why this logic is completely flawed. Same thing in Hebrew. You know how the language works, you know how the grammar works, and so you know what this should be. Just because there's no definite article by no means is unheard of. I mean, that happens all over the place. It's probably has to happen at least 1,000 times in the Old Testament that there's a the, or that there's missing a the, and we put the in English so that it makes sense. Now, the claim that this should be when. Okay, so you can translate this word as when if it introduces a temporal infinitive clause, which means that the verb, which is bara, needs to be in the infinitive. Well, it's not. Okay, there's no debating that this word is not in the infinitive. You can clearly see, you see these little T's down here? They shouldn't be there. Okay, there should be 2 dots here, just like this one has 2 dots. There should be 2 dots here instead of a T. And there should be a little dot up top instead of this T. Well, that's not the way it looks. Okay, that's not the way it is. And therefore, it's not an infinitive. Not only that, this word right here, this word right here, would have to be attached to this verb in order for this to happen. Okay, which both things are not happening. Therefore, you can't translate this to win, right? You're just making up rules now if you're going to do that. Okay, now. Also, if we look at other times where this construction happens of this letter and this letter, every other time it's translated as in the beginning. No one's ever translating it as when began or putting when in the front in any way, okay, and then rearranging things. No one's ever doing that. It's always the same, in the beginning, okay? Now, no one's ever creating controversy about these other verses in Jeremiah that have this. Well, why is that? Well, I think it's obvious because there's no theological bent needed to be achieved there. Whereas in Genesis 1:1, there is. There's trying to be some sort of theological meaning being drawn out of it that's just not there. So you're trying to bend things so that it works. And that's just not how you're supposed to do exegesis. You're supposed to go by the rules of grammar and by what the words actually are, not what you wish them to be. So hopefully this shows what is being talked about and what the rebuttal is in saying that this is not when. I mean, the word isn't right. Okay, it's the wrong things underneath these letters. These T's shouldn't be there. And this preposition is in the wrong place. And not only that, the definite article, not being there is just not a big deal. I mean, that happens all the time. It's not really an astonishing find. It literally happens thousands of times. So that's not really a big deal. The reason you put it in is because you got to translate it into English. So there's no big mystery surprise there. Looking at these 2 words right here, I hope you can kind of, visualize how they look. You got the 2 dots here, the 2 dots going this way, 1 dot there. Okay, these words here. All right, so it's translated in the beginning in Genesis 1:1. So now if we look at Jeremiah, just so you guys know I'm not lying, and Jeremiah here. All right, let's look. So there it is. Same word, right? Same word. Let's see how they translate it in the beginning. Not when began or whatever. Okay, it's in the beginning. All right, no surprise there. So 27:1. Happens again in the beginning. But wait, there's no the under here. Okay, doesn't matter. All right, we're translating it into English. It's got to sound like an English speaker would say it. So this happens all the time. It's not like a never before seen thing. Okay, once again, Jeremiah 28:1. Look, in beginning. Oh wait, at the beginning. Oh, okay, they still put the definite article in there. All right. And again, context kind of determines what you're going to put for this word. And it is possible to have when, like I was saying. It's possible to have when, but you got to have the right situation. I mean, the word has to be an infinitive. You can't just do it to whatever you please. It's got to fit the context of what's going on. But nonetheless, here they translate the where there clearly isn't. but that's because you have to translate it into English. Now, nobody's fighting, or there's no controversy over these verses, these other three verses, right? Nobody cares. And that's because there's no theological thing to get out of it, all right? And so as soon as there's some controversy over something, all of a sudden people start seeing things that they would never normally see if you were just approaching it and just translating what it says. Now, while IP did cite sources for proponents of adding when, there are many other scholars who do not agree with this view, not to mention any basic biblical Hebrew grammar book. Halot, the standard go-to dictionary for anyone who studies biblical Hebrew, also disagrees with the interpretation mentioned by IP. Halot states that Westerman and O.H. Stack, in the context, think it should be translated as an independent clause and not as a temporal antecedent to verse 2 or 3. Now, they take this view because they believe it is to be used as a title or as a sort of heading to the creation account. But nonetheless, this is the view Halot takes on the matter of Genesis 1:1. They don't take the side of it being a subordinate or dependent clause. Now, they take this view not because they believe in a young earth, they probably don't. They take that position because that's where all the evidence leads. If you don't like what it ends up saying, well, tough cookies. That's the way it is. You got to follow the rules. Now, you're probably wondering where Jason Lyle fits into this episode. Well, here it is. Before I close out this episode, I want to comment on the lacking response given from the Young Earth side on the channel Revealed Apologetics. They don't bring on a Hebrew scholar to defend the position from the Hebrew text. Instead, they bring on someone who is outside of his wheelhouse, and when it got to the Q&A portion, it got very embarrassing, as one of my 8-year-old students was able to answer this question in 15 seconds that the speaker never could answer. Jason Lyle, the Young Earth defender, has just given all these rebuttals about the Hebrew text and how it means what he says it does, and such for a good amount of time. We get to the Q&A, and the first question out of the gate is about the very word he was just making all of his points on. Only he reveals he doesn't know Hebrew very well, or possibly at all, to say the least.
Jason, what's the difference? He has these Hebrew. I don't know if you could read that.
I can't be. Let me see if I can enlarge it a little bit.
Okay.
I can read a little bit of Hebrew, but
you're taking a visual test right now. Cover your left eye. Cover your left eye.
So, but okay. So that's Bereshith, and okay, it's just a vowel pointing that's different.
Okay.
In Bereshith. So the vowel pointing is different on the ba. One and the other one lacks the degesh, so it would be Bereshith. I'm not familiar with I'm reading right to left because Hebrew is right to left. So what would be the second term? So I can't tell you. Sorry about that. I don't know.
No worries. No worries.
That difference. Reshith itself just means beginning. And normally you'd put the beth right, you attach it to it. That's the way it is in Scripture. There's no space there, so it would be attached to it.
Now, Sentinel Apologetics, you must have known you could trip him up with this question. I would like to know what Sentinel Apologetics was thinking after seeing Jason Lyle's reaction to his question. I was dumbfounded that he didn't know. I couldn't believe it. How could you spend all that time talking so certainly about things you don't even know well at all? It's craziness. Craziness. Alrighty, so those are my brotherly arguments for some possible weaknesses of these Hebrew proofs given in the top 10 biblical proofs against young earth creationism. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe I missed something obvious there, but that's just what I see. Like I said, this is not my normal area that I go to on this channel. Next week, we'll take a look at feminism and some of the claims about gender. But if you liked the content today or found it helpful, let me know in the comments if you hated it and never want me to do it again, and let me know that too. Well, that's all for this episode, but if you liked this episode, go ahead and subscribe and check out our other episodes as we address different issues in our world and bring you the truth of Christ in a post-truth culture. Grace and peace, brothers and sisters.